Greetings, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Topic UFO. Tonight, we're going to be speaking to Mr. Richard Gray, who in October of 1994 had a very close encounter with a triangular craft just outside of his home in Reston, Virginia. Needless to say, this was a life-changing event for Richard, and he is going to be joining us via Skype in just a moment to tell us all about it and what's happened since that time. Before we sync up with Richard, I would just like to mention a couple of upcoming guests that have just confirmed their appearances here on Topic UFO. The first being Denise Williams, who is a producer for Make Magic Productions, and she's working on a film right now entitled Dr. John Mack, A True Story. I am not real familiar with Dr. Mack, but from what I've read, he was a Harvard psychiatry professor, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and he lost everything when he reluctantly agreed to work with alleged alien abductees and drew a conclusion that completely shattered and transformed his worldview and his life. I'm really looking forward to this because I tell you, as soon as you publicly announce that you believe in aliens and UFOs, you can be shunned very quickly sometimes. And next, we have Mr. Michael Horn, who's going to be on the show. Now, Michael has a new film that's just been released, just over the past few days, I believe, entitled And Did They Listen?, which is a film about the Billy Meier UFO case. I'm sure a lot of you either know of Mr. Horn or have seen his work before, but it's some really amazing stuff. So he'll be here as well. So stay tuned. Both of these guests will be joining us over the next few weeks. Okay, so coming up in just 1 minute, Mr. Richard Gray. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
This calls for a close-up. I'll say it does. It's right out of the old family album. But how can we get a close-up?
Well, if you have a Westinghouse television set, it's very simple.
Whenever you get a picture that calls for a close-up, just turn the knob of that amazing new invention, the Westinghouse electronic magnifier.
And there. You're so close, you feel that you could almost reach out and remove this false mustache. Only a Westinghouse set has this wonderful new electronic magnifier. And here's the knob that controls it. Now, let's see exactly what happens when you're watching a television screen and you turn on the electronic magnifier. Let's suppose that you're watching a couple of wrestlers and you'd like to see them closer. Just turn the electronic magnifier knob.
And presto, you've got a ringside seat at the match. A wonderful advantage, isn't it?
Yes. And only a Westinghouse set has this amazing electronic magnifier. And this set also has a built-in antenna. That means in many localities there are no installation costs. And this set also has Westinghouse synchro tuning. Now that means that when you tune in for the best sound, you don't get a so-called picture like this.
And when you tune in for the best picture, you don't get sound like this. Because Westinghouse synchro tuning tunes in the best sound and the best picture together automatically. Yes, you'll find this Westinghouse set so easy to enjoy. The smoothest operating television you can get today.
And remember, with the electronic magnifier, this Westinghouse 12.5-inch set gives you big picture television at small picture price. It costs only $259.95, and you can buy it on a small down payment plan. See it at your Westinghouse dealers tomorrow.
Welcome back, everyone. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our guest for the evening, Mr. Richard Gray. Richard, are you out there, sir?
Yeah. Hi, Rick. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your life to come speak with us. Richard, before we get into the actual sighting story, I think it's important that the viewers know just a little bit about you. Can you tell us kind of your background as far as what you've done up to where you're at now? I know you spent a long time in the airline industry, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's not too difficult. Graduated from University of Maryland with a business degree and an economics degree, and I pretty much joined the airlines right away, and started out working for those that are old enough to remember Trans World Airline, TWA. And then I switched over to Northwest Airlines, which eventually was purchased by Delta. I spent 28 years in the airline business. What I did for them was I worked a great deal of that overseas, and I would go into countries a year before they would start flying there, hire the staff, get the computers up and running, the telephone system up and running, and then eventually they'd start sending airplanes in. And once it was up and running and profitable, I'd move on to a new location. As a result, I did, just to give you an idea, this is just a little bit of it, 2 years in Ireland. I went up and did 2 years in Sweden, went down, did 4 years in London, did 2 years in Paris, also was in Holland, Amsterdam for a couple of years, and also in Germany.
Wow.
So that really is my background. It really has been nothing but the airline business.
So you have been all over the world, but it wasn't until you were back home that you had an experience.
That's correct. Actually, after doing a lot of years in Europe, I came back and I was the regional marketing and sales director in Washington, D.C. for Northwest Airlines. And we had an office down on 17th and I, and I was at the time commuting into Washington, D.C. I lived in Reston, Virginia, and that's really where I had the sighting.
So, just so everybody understands, we're talking 1994 in Reston, Virginia.
That is correct. October of 94.
Okay.
For people that are familiar with Reston, Virginia, they'll know it's the community that I lived on was actually called Links, Links, and I actually lived on Links Drive at the time. So I forget the name of the golf course. It's funny that I forget. I've played on it many times, but and we lived on the 9th Fairway, and the house backed up to it, and that's where the sighting took place.
So it sounds like it was a very nice neighborhood, upscale neighborhood.
Yeah, it was, and the houses were really nice, and this one backed up to a walkway between the golf course and the 9th Fairway, and you really had a great view of the golf course. Do you want me to tell you some of the specifics of the sighting?
Absolutely. That was going to be my next question. Why don't you go ahead and tell us, beginning to end, what happened to you?
Yeah, I was working downtown and got home about, I'm going to say about 8:15 to 8:30. And just as I got home, my wife was leaving for work, and the kids were upstairs. They were small at the time and in bed. And I came in and kind of checked on the kids, came downstairs, and I sat on the back deck, which actually was on the second floor overlooking the golf course, and just kicking back and just kind of enjoying the view. It was one of those beautiful October nights, warm and just really a great night. And all of a sudden, to my left, the golf course started to get very bright. A white, bright light started to, you could just see it, coming down the golf course. But I couldn't see what was making the light or what was causing the light. And I stood up and looked over the rail, and it took a second. And all of a sudden, I saw this enormous, slow-moving object coming exactly right down the middle of the ninth fairway. And it was on a trajectory to actually, it looked like it was going to land on the golf course. And I would say that this thing was somewhere between roughly 300 to 500 feet in altitude, actually very low. It was enormous. It was triangular in shape, and it was moving very, very slowly. My guess is somewhere between 15 and 20 miles an hour, and it was absolutely silent. So this really was, it wasn't a blinking light in the sky. It was not something so far away. There's no way that it was anything except what it was. Mm-hmm. Anyway, this craft had a large circular light in the front and two little bit smaller lights at the points in the back. And it was coming down towards the golf course. And just as it passed my house, it was just above the trees. I'd say maybe 100 feet above the trees. And I sat there absolutely frozen, not really quite sure what to do. And just as it passed over the trees and started to go out of sight, I ran through the dining room, which is the deck was in the back, and then the dining room kitchen, and then another deck out front. So I ran all the way out front, jumped over the railing, and then on the front of the house, and ran around back. And as I got very close to the golf course, something inside of me just said, this is probably not a very good idea. And I ran back to the house, grabbed a yellow legal pad and a pencil. I sketched out the craft that I saw, jotted down the date, the time, and everything about it that I could think of. And I looked out off the deck, and I was just in awe. I thought, actually, at the time, you're going to think this is kind of funny, I thought, this is going to be the biggest news that we have ever seen. This is going to be all over the news. Yeah. And, of course, there was nothing about it. To make a long story short, I finally went off to bed late that night, probably pushing around, 11:30. Had a bit of a difficult time falling asleep, and woke up the next morning. And this is really the odd part about this whole sighting. And it's probably a little hard for some people to believe, but what happened is I woke up with no memory of the sighting whatsoever. And I went about my business, even washed the car out front. It was a Friday night that I had the sighting, so it was Saturday. I didn't go to work. And kids and I just did a bunch of stuff. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I finally went out, thought I'd sit on the back deck. And as I walked through the dining room, there was a yellow legal pad with the sketch and the notes, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks, like, oh my God, I completely forgot that I saw this thing.
That is amazing, Richard.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And I really had a hard time talking to people about it. And it started to really consume me. It didn't really get in the way of work, but boy, did it make you think about what did I see and where did it come from? And the one thing that kept rolling around through my mind is whatever I saw was not of this world. And I just kept repeating that mentally to myself. And
let me ask you, Richard.
Yeah, sure.
Before we go any further, when you saw this thing, did you have any strange feelings at that point in time? Did you feel any, static electricity? Did you, I don't know, anything? Did you feel any weird vibrations at all? Or do you just remember just being completely stunned?
No, I did not feel any physical effects whatsoever. The only thing that I can tell you is when I ran around to the golf course and stopped, it was like something got into my mind that you really don't want to do this. This is not a good idea. I wish I knew what possessed me to do that, because I ran through the house and literally put one hand on the deck fence out front and leaped over it with both feet. I wanted to see this thing. I was mesmerized and I was in a state of shock. And I thought, what is it? I've got to see it. And within the space of jumping over that fence, within about 20 seconds, I just stopped and turned around and went back home and jotted the whole thing down and thought, for whatever reason, this is not something I should pursue.
And do you remember the next day when you saw the yellow notepad? Like you say, it hit you like a ton of bricks. Oh my God, I did see this thing yesterday. Did you immediately keep it to yourself? Did you tell your wife? Did you call your best friend? What did you do? Did you keep it inside?
Kept it inside for about 2 or 3 days. And I have one very close friend that we talk all the time. And I guess 2 or 3 days down the road, I called him, and the best way to describe it is I very tentatively told him about it. And fortunately, he's very open-minded, and he asked a lot of questions. And after that, I didn't tell anybody for the longest time. And finally, when I did, I told a group of family members, my brothers and cousins, while we were all on the beach. And that was kind of an odd experience, too, because when there was a lull in the conversation, I said, I want you guys to know that I had a UFO sighting. And
they kind of looked at you strange?
Not really, but they all looked at me like, okay, is this something we're all supposed to fall for, or is this for real? So I told them the whole story. They asked some questions, and then the odd part about it was after a few minutes, it's like, okay, where should we go for lunch? And I just wanted to know, what did I see? Was this a craft from another world? Was this a secret government experimental craft? And it caused me to think about religion, life in the universe, and really to challenge all aspects of my life.
I can completely understand that. Did you at any time even think that, my God, maybe I'm going nuts? Or was it so real that wasn't a possibility?
That was never an option. That was never a possibility. What I saw is what I saw. In my mind, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I've never struggled with the reality of it. It just was what it was. What I struggled with for a lot of years is, was this a government craft or was this an alien craft? And that's really what I struggled with. And I finally just kind of let that go, because where I came down on that is it was either an extraterrestrial craft or it was the American government using technology that's not of this world.
Right.
One of the two. Which one, I couldn't tell you, but it had to be one of those two things. And one of the things about the sighting that I neglected to tell you is when you looked at this triangular craft and it had the 3 lights at each point, it was so close, just above me, that you could see through the center of the craft. And I've often wondered, was it translucent? Was I actually looking at the sky through the craft? Or was it some sort of imagery on the bottom of the craft that projected the sky above it? And to this day, I still don't know, but you could very clearly see through it.
Well, I have heard other accounts of people seeing these triangles that report the same type of thing. It looks like almost a reflection of the stars. and it, in a way, it's like you're looking right through it. So, very similar in reports. Have you? Did you talk to anyone such as MUFON or any other reporting agency when this happened, or since it happened?
No, I haven't. When this happened, I had no idea who MUFON was. I had no idea where to go to look up things about UFOs. I really was at a loss on what to do. And because I really didn't make this public, no one was offering advice either. And it was something that I really kept to myself for a lot of years. But, eventually that's what caused me to create my website, Educating Humanity. And I needed a place to get this out and a place to let people know what I experienced and to try to share other sightings that people, experience.
Right. Now,
Because, it's so funny because everybody, they either believe or they want to believe, but what you've been through, what I've been through, and you witnessed what I witnessed, there's no ifs, ands, or buts anymore. These things exist. These things are real. I don't need to be convinced. And it seems like when you look at all these internet websites or you go to these forums, everyone's trying to find the smoking gun. I don't need that.
You already have it. You already have the smoking gun.
Yeah, and I often chuckle when I read an account because now I'm very well plugged into the UFO community as far as the sightings and what's happening, and I infrequently, I should say, read of people having a similar account of mine, and it's always the same. They're in a state of shock. They didn't really want this to happen, but it did. And they don't need to be convinced. They don't need to have a video from YouTube, or they don't need to check out a sighting that someone's posting from MUFON or from anybody else. Once you've seen it, you know the truth, and that's all you need to know.
Well, I have myself never had an experience. I've never had a sighting. But I can only imagine that it must be a traumatic experience to one's soul. I mean, it just must cause your brain to go in 1,000 different directions trying to figure out what the hell just happened. What did I just see?
Yeah, there's no question about that. I think the initial reaction that you have is you're in a state of shock. And it takes a long time just to process what you've seen because it does not fit into your reality. It doesn't fit into your day-to-day life. It's something that people talk about, something they make movies about. But when it really happens, it really is a stunning experience. And then I think once you process that information, then the questions start. I mean, how do you reconcile religion? Right. And how do you reconcile that there is more than likely, from what you've witnessed, intelligent, advanced life forms in the universe?
It's amazing stuff, Richard. And, in one way, I can feel empathy for you because of what you went through. But on the other hand, I can think, my God, how lucky you were to be one of the few people on this planet to have, relatively few people on this planet to have a sighting like that. It's not something that just anybody has had. So in a way, I guess you're lucky.
Yeah, well, at this time I was raising a couple of small kids, had working very hard, but boy, every spare moment I would have driving home in the car, you couldn't help but think about it. It was really all consuming at some point. And even today, it's something that I still think about a lot today. And but I think I've processed it as much as I possibly can. And I think no one's going to step up and say, here are the answers and here's what you saw. So you have to do your best to figure it out. And I think I've taken it about as far as I can. So to say I'm comfortable with it is that's not really the right choice of words. But I've reconciled myself to the fact that it happened. I can live with it, and I possibly will never know the truth.
So here we are 20 years later, 2014. You have a website entitled educatinghumanity.com. When did you build the website and why?
I built the website in 2010, and I did that because I finally had the time to do it. And not to get into my whole personal life here, but I came down with cancer, and nothing too serious. I'm perfectly fine now, but I had to go through several operations and really get that out of my life, and that has been taken care of. My health is great, and my long-term outlook is wonderful. But the reason I'm telling you that is it forced me to retire from work. And I had just hit an age where I was eligible for early retirement. And this had been on my mind so much that I wanted to do something about it. And you'll laugh at this. I had no idea how to create a website. I knew how to use a computer, but I didn't know how to write any code. I didn't know how to program anything. And I went about learning on my own and had some help from a few people. And since then, I've taken on a lot as far as learning a lot about the internet, about websites, about programming, about writing code for certain things. But I wanted to get my experience out, and people can find it if they go to the website. There's a menu bar up top, and one of the things you can click on, it simply says UFO experience, and they'll find basically the exactly what we've been talking about there. And also, I wanted to put out there other people's stories that are similar to mine, and I also wanted to put out sightings that I think are realistic or plausible. So I make a really big effort to not post shaky lights and all the nonsense that you find in this field, unfortunately, and there's a lot of it. So,
God, yes.
And you'll find story. I just posted yesterday, for instance, a story about the Pope had his weekly address, and once again, Pope Francis is talking about baptizing aliens. Quite frankly, I find that fascinating. Why would he bother to do that? And then, of course, there was, you've probably seen it, maybe you haven't, the sighting down in New Zealand that happened just 2 days ago, where this TV film crew was out, and they actually caught these 2 UFOs, and they're myth. They're baffled on what they saw. And I think people find that interesting. And I think these are, things worthy of people to think about and to talk about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the whole thing with the Vatican and the baptizing aliens, I mean, that's just a whole nother discussion in itself. I do have some personal thoughts about it. And in fact, I was planning on doing a whole episode just on it. So maybe I will do that, because it is strange that the Vatican would even take the time to say something like that. And it's true. From what I understand, per the Vatican radio, that's what the Pope said. So,
I've written a lot about disclosure, and I've published a lot of that on my website. And one of the posts that I put out there, I think in 2012, that's been one of the most popular is one about the Vatican. And really, when you stop and think about the Vatican, this is one of the most archaic institutions in the world. Mm-hmm. This is an institution that does not allow women in any significant role, let alone to be priests. This is an institution that is dead set against any form of contraception. And this is an institution that can't get information out quickly. And this is an organization that is slow and stodgy and behind the times. But boy, when it comes to extraterrestrials and it comes to aliens, where is this coming from? They're out, we'll baptize them. They've gone on national TV 5 times in Italy saying that aliens are real. And there's a couple of YouTube videos where you can see these emissaries of the Pope out there talking about this. And they've even gone as far as to say the demonic and the possessing of people by the devil is not an alien abduction. They're making a distinction between these two different things. So I find this exceptionally fascinating on why they're talking about this at every opportunity and holding conferences around the world. They just had one in April of 2014 in Arizona that was not open to the public, but that was the topic of conversation. So it's really fascinating.
You know, and the other question is, why now? If they've had this information for so long, why just over the last few years, really, have they been so vocal about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd love to know, but boy, they're moving at light speed on this issue, and that's something they don't do.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that an organization like, you know, the Catholic Church would even be involved in discussing a topic like this. You know, I don't know whether they're hurting so bad for congregation that, you know, they'll welcome anyone with any types of beliefs. I don't know if that's it, or if they truly have some information that would blow our minds.
Well, you know, when you stop and think about it, the Pope talking about baptizing aliens, when you think about that, that would turn off most people as a foolish thing to talk about, frivolous thing to talk about, and an unimportant thing, because everybody's going about their own daily lives. They have their own needs and wants and desires, and they expect a certain thing out of the church. They do not expect the church to be talking about baptizing aliens. But not only is the church doing it, but the Pope is doing it. So my take on it is there's got to be a reason. Even though the Pope made light of the type of people he would baptize, he said little green men.
Right.
You know, he's making light of that, but yet the topic is at the forefront of the discussion. The topic is out there. It's all over the newspapers. And they've got to be, I think, getting ready for this for disclosure of some sort to come out into the open. And maybe it's a long process, 2, 5, 10 years, and they chip away at it every opportunity they get. Who knows? But there's got to be a reason. I don't think they're doing it for humor, and I certainly don't think they're doing it to grow their congregation. So,
well, it'll be interesting to see. I hope I live long enough to experience disclosure when it finally does happen. That's all I hope. I hope I'm here when it finally does happen. You know, a lot of people say we don't need disclosure. We already know that this stuff is true. But I think people are hoping that we'll get the whole story. And I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever get the whole story.
Well, I think we will get the whole story. I think it will be inevitable. And also, I understand that people say people like me come forward. I've seen the NASA astronauts come forward. I've seen government officials, military officials. You've even had presidents that said they've seen UFOs. So, yeah, we've had some disclosure. But I think the truth of the matter is to have this accepted around the world, it's got to be from a major government, or it's got to be from an organization like NASA, or it has to be from the United Nations or the Vatican. And it has to be from one of those recognized organizations. And when you stop and think about it, the Vatican would be the most likely one, because take South America, Central America, much of Europe, they wouldn't believe it if the Pope wouldn't come forward and say this is what's happening. People would have a hard time. I think the religious aspect of disclosure is probably certainly the most contentious aspect. So we need the government to step forward. But you have to remember, disclosure is a two-way street, because intelligent life could say, here we are, and that's all you need.
Right. Who's going to do it first? Is it going to come out willingly from our own people, or will it be thrusted upon us by another, some alien race?
Well, the only thing I can tell people from my experience is one of two things is happening. Either aliens or extraterrestrials are visiting this planet, or the government has technology that's not of this world. And they're using technology that is so advanced that it wasn't created here. So either one of those roads, you've got to believe that extraterrestrials are real.
I tend to agree with you, Richard. I really do. Well, listen, we're just about out of time here, Richard, but I wanted to mention again the website, www.educatinghumanity.com. And I take it you have all sorts of different type of information on that website. I've been there. It's very nicely done. So kudos on that.
I should tell you this, Rick.
Yes.
There's about 5,000 posts on that website, and there's no advertising on it. It does not ask for donations. It's got no commercial value whatsoever. It really is a labor of love, and the only way I measure success is how many people come and visit. Yeah. And obviously, my interest is to get more people to come, but it's not a money-making proposition.
Right.
It's done really to inform people and just to try to get the truth out there, and to get people thinking maybe in a little bit differently about this whole phenomena.
And I think we all, us ufologists or whatever we call ourselves, I think that's all we really want is to try to get people to open up their minds a little bit. There are still a lot of people out there that are pretty close-minded on this subject, but it's getting more open and more open every day. So, plus, thanks to people such as yourself. Well, Richard, listen, it's been absolutely spectacular talking with you. Again, I just can't even imagine what a sighting like that must have felt like, what that experience must have felt like. And I really thank you for coming on the show and telling us about it.
Thanks, Rick. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
All right. Well, listen, we will definitely stay in touch. Educatinghumanity.com. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. Good night.
The answer is to keep it. You'll believe it when you find something screaming across your mind. Green
slime. Either know of Mr. Horn or have seen his work before, but it's some really amazing stuff. So he'll be here as well. So stay tuned. Both of these guests will be joining us over the next few weeks. Okay, so coming up in just 1 minute, Mr. Richard Gray. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
This calls for a close-up. I'll say it does. It's right out of the old family album. But how can we get a close-up?
Well, if you have a Westinghouse television set, it's very simple.
Whenever you get a picture that calls for a close-up, just turn the knob of that amazing new invention, the Westinghouse electronic magnifier.
And there. You're so close, you feel that you could almost reach out and remove this false mustache. Only a Westinghouse set has this wonderful new electronic magnifier. And here's the knob that controls it. Now, let's see.
Red. He was a Harvard psychiatry professor, a Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he lost everything when he reluctantly agreed to work with alleged alien abductees and drew a conclusion that completely shattered and transformed his worldview and his life. I'm really looking forward to this because I tell you, as soon as you publicly announce that you believe in aliens and UFOs, you can be shunned very quickly sometimes. And next, we have Mr. Michael Horn, who's going to be on the show. Now, Michael has a new film that's just been released, just over the past few days, I believe, entitled And Did They Listen?, which is a film about the Billy Meyer UFO case. I'm sure a lot of you, thanks for tuning in to Topic UFO. Tonight, we're going to be speaking to Mr. Richard Gray, who in October of 1994 had a very close encounter with a triangular craft just outside of his home in Reston, Virginia. Needless to say, this was a life-changing event for Richard, and he is going to be joining us via Skype in just a moment to tell us all about it and what's happened since that time. Before we sync up with Richard, I would just like to mention a couple of upcoming guests that have just confirmed their appearances here on Topic UFO. The first being Denise Williams, who is a producer for Make Magic Productions, and she's working on a film right now entitled Dr. John Mack, A True Story. I am not real familiar with Dr. Mack, but from what I've Greetings, everyone.
Exactly what happens when you're watching a television screen and you turn on the electronic magnifier. Let's suppose that you're watching a couple of wrestlers and you'd like to see them closer. Just turn the electronic magnifier knob.
And presto, you've got a ringside seat at the match. A wonderful advantage, isn't it?
Yes. And only a Westinghouse set has this amazing electronic magnifier. And this set also has a built-in antenna. That means in many localities there are no installation costs. And this set also has Westinghouse synchro tuning. Now that means that when you tune in for the best sound, you don't get a so-called picture like this.
And when you tune in for the best picture, you don't get sound like this. Because Westinghouse synchro tuning tunes in the best sound and the best picture together automatically. Yes, you'll find this Westinghouse set so easy to enjoy. The smoothest operating television you can get today.
And remember, with electronic magnifier, this Westinghouse 12.5